The Boeing 737 was 37 minutes from Los Angeles when the left engine exploded. Not the theatrical Hollywood kind of explosion. No fireball, no screaming metal tearing through the fuselage. Just a catastrophic mechanical failure at 38,000 feet that sent a shudder through the aircraft like a predator's warning growl. The passengers felt it in their chests before they heard it. Then came the smoke, acrid and wrong, curling through the ventilation system. Then came the silence from the cockpit, which was somehow worse than any alarm. In seat 14C, a woman in her late 30s with close-cropped dark hair and a faded leather jacket closed her paperback without marking the page. Her name was Kestrel Voss, though nobody on this flight knew that. Nobody recognized her. Why would they? She'd been out of the cockpit for 3 years, working air traffic coordination at a regional hub in Nevada, filing reports and drinking coffee that tasted like regret. The kind of quiet purgatory reserved for pilots who'd made one mistake, just one, that ended a career built on 10,000 flawless hours. The plane tilted, not dramatically but enough that the flight attendants stopped mid-service, their trained smiles flickering. Kestrel's eyes tracked to the window. The engine cowling was peeled back like a gutted fish, and she could see the exposed turbine blades glowing dull red against the cobalt sky. The aircraft was still flying, still pushing forward on one engine, but the asymmetry was pulling them into a lazy descent. She glanced at her watch. 14 minutes to lax airspace. Maybe less if the pilots were good. Then the intercom crackled. A man's voice, strained but controlled. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is Captain Torres. We've experienced a mechanical issue with our left engine and will be making an emergency landing at the nearest suitable airport. Flight attendants, prepare the cabin." Kestrel didn't move. She watched the other passengers react, some gasping, some clutching armrests. One woman too rose up, beginning to cry softly into her hands. The man beside her, a software engineer with expensive headphones, looked at Kestrel like she might have answers. She didn't offer any. Instead, she closed her eyes and did what she always did when the world tilted. She listened. The engines, the airflow, the subtle changes in pressure against her skin. She could feel the aircraft fighting itself, compensating for the asymmetric thrust, burning fuel it couldn't afford to burn. The pilots were doing everything right, but everything right might not be enough. Not today, not with what she was hearing in the wind. That was when the radio in the cockpit began transmitting on the emergency frequency, and the sky around them started filling with company. 2 F-18 Super Hornets materialized off the starboard wing like angels of gunmetal and precision. They weren't there, and then they were, rising from below with the kind of effortless grace that only came from thousands of hours in the most unforgiving classrooms on Earth. Their paint schemes were standard navy gray, but Kestrel could see the weapons pylons, the refueling probes, the way the lead pilot kept his distance exactly right, close enough to assess, far enough not to create wake turbulence that could destabilize the wounded airliner. The cockpit radio crackled again, this time on a frequency most civilians would never hear. "United 723, this is Reaper 11 off your right side. We've been tasked to escort you in. What's your status?" Captain Torres sounded grateful. "Reaper 11, we've lost our left engine. Controllability is degraded but manageable. Fuel burn is high. We're committed to lax, estimate 12 minutes. "Copy that 723. We'll stay with you. You're doing fine, just keep her steady." Kestrel opened her eyes. She knew that call sign, Reaper 11. She knew the protocol, the brevity codes, the calm professionalism that masked the calculations happening at light speed behind every transmission. She also knew something the passengers around her didn't. Those fighters weren't just here to watch. They were here to make sure that if this aircraft started falling, it wouldn't fall onto a neighborhood. They were flying the line between guardian and executioner. The woman too rose up, was crying louder now. A flight attendant moved through the cabin with mechanical efficiency, checking seat belts, her face a mask of competence layered over visible fear. Kestrel looked back out the window. The lead F-18 was holding position, its pilot's helmet barely visible through the canopy. She wondered if he was young, if this was his first real emergency intercept, if his hands were sweating inside his gloves. "Reaper 1-1, be advised," Captain Torres said, his voice tighter now. "We're getting fluctuations in our hydraulics. Right aileron response is sluggish." A pause, longer than it should have been. Then, "Copy. Recommend reducing speed if able. Do you need priority vectors?" "Negative. We need this runway as fast as we can get it. Declaring emergency. Souls on board 164. 164 people. Kestrel did the math automatically. Fuel load at takeoff minus burn time minus what was venting from the damaged pylon. They had maybe 10 minutes before choices became consequences. The software engineer beside her was staring out the window now, fixated on the fighter jets. "Why are they here?" he whispered. Kestrel didn't answer. She was watching the way the wingman, Reaper 1-2, was hanging back slightly, positioned for a better vantage of the airliner's underbelly, looking for fire, looking for structural damage, looking for reasons to make the call nobody wanted to make. "United 723, Reaper 1-1. Can you give me visual confirmation on your landing gear status?" "Stand by," a long silence. Then, "Gear is down and locked, 3 green." "Good, that's real good. You've got this." Kestrel recognized the tone, the deliberate calm, the careful encouragement that was also a kind of prayer. She'd used that voice herself once, talking a rookie pilot through a hydraulic failure over the Nevada desert. She'd used it again during her last flight, the one that ended her career, when she'd made a split-second call that saved 200 passengers but violated 3 regulations and cost her the only thing she'd ever been good at. The plane shuddered again. This time the passengers screamed. The asymmetry was getting worse. Captain Torres was fighting the yoke now. She could feel it in the way the aircraft moved, the overcorrections and countercorrections of a pilot wrestling with a machine that no longer wanted to obey. "Reaper 1-1, we're losing it," Torres said, and for the first time there was something raw in his voice. "Hydraulics are failing. Ailerons are non-responsive. We're going to have to use asymmetric thrust in prey." The fighter pilot didn't hesitate. "United 723, you are not alone up here. We've got you. Lax Tower, Reaper 1-1, priority emergency, clear all runways, this bird is coming in hot." Kestrel closed her eyes again. She could see it playing out. The approach, too fast, too steep, the pilots wrestling with rudder and throttle, and whatever control surfaces still answered. She could see the runway rising up like a judgment. She could see the moment where skill and luck either converged or didn't. The man beside her was praying now, whispering something in Spanish. The woman too rose up, had stopped crying and was just staring straight ahead, her face blank with shock. The flight attendants were strapped in, their emergency training overriding their fear. And then a voice came over the cabin intercom. Not Captain Torres, someone else. A woman's voice, steady and clear. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is the first officer. We are going to land this aircraft safely. When we touch down, remain seated until we come to a complete stop. If evacuation is necessary, follow crew instructions. Stay calm, stay low, stay alive." Kestrel opened her eyes. She recognized competence when she heard it. That first officer was good, maybe good enough. The F-18s dropped lower, flanking the airliner now, their presence both escort and witness. They were close enough that Kestrel could see the missiles on their rails, the way the sunlight caught the canopy edges. Close enough that, if something went catastrophically wrong, they'd have maybe 3 seconds to decide whether to watch or to act. The Pacific coastline appeared through the haze. Lowe's Angels spread out beneath them like a circuit board of light and geometry. Lax was ahead. She could see the parallel runways, the long, clean lines that represented either salvation or finale. "Reaper 1-1, we have the field. Beginning final approach." "Roger that, 723. You're lined up perfect. Winds are favorable. You've got this. Bring her home." Kestrel could feel the landing gear drag increasing, could feel the aircraft settling into ground effect, that cushion of compressed air that either helped you land gracefully or lied to you about how much sky you had left. The flaps would be extended fully now, the spoilers armed, every system that still worked pushed to its absolute limit. The runway was rising, too fast, just slightly too fast. The software engineer grabbed Kestrel's armrest. She didn't pull away. Nobody should die alone. And then the tires hit concrete with a scream that sounded like birth and death and everything between. The thrust reversers deployed. She could hear the roar even over the cabin chaos, and the pilots stood on the brakes like they were trying to push the aircraft through the earth itself. The deceleration was violent, whipping passengers forward against their restraints, sending loose items flying, turning the cabin into a centrifuge of force and prayer. But they were down, they were slowing, they were alive. The aircraft finally shuddered to a stop 3,000 feet down the runway, smoke pouring from the brakes, emergency vehicles already converging with lights painting the world in red and white urgency. The cabin erupted in applause and sobbing, and the kind of laughter that only comes after staring into the void. Kestrel sat perfectly still, breathing carefully, feeling her heartbeat slowly return to something approximating normal. Outside the window, the F-18s roared past overhead in formation, their afterburners igniting briefly. A salute, a farewell, a reminder that some people still knew how to fly. The evacuation was orderly, professional. The slides deployed, passengers descended in controlled panic, and within 6 minutes the aircraft was empty except for crew and investigators. Kestrel was one of the last off, moving down the aisle with her small backpack, stepping over debris past the cockpit door that stood open now. She paused there, just for a moment. Captain Torres was still in his seat, hands shaking as he went through the shutdown checklist with mechanical precision. The first officer, a woman maybe 10 years younger than Kestrel, with pilot's eyes that had just seen too much, looked up and met her gaze. Something passed between them, a recognition that had nothing to do with names or words. "Good flying," Kestrel said quietly. The first officer nodded once. "Thank you for not panicking back there. Some passengers make it harder. Some passengers know better." Kestrel continued toward the exit, down the stairs, onto the tarmac where the California sun was too bright and the air smelled like jet fuel and scorched rubber. Emergency crews were everywhere. Passengers were being shepherded toward buses. Nobody was looking at her. Nobody knew. She was almost to the terminal access road when she heard the voice behind her. Excuse me, ma'am." Kestrel turned. A man in a flight suit was jogging toward her, his helmet tucked under one arm. He was maybe 30, with the kind of clean-cut intensity that marked Navy fighter pilots like a brand. His name tape read TORRES, no relation to the airline captain, just a coincidence that felt like fate. "Yes," Kestrel said. The pilot stopped a few feet away, breathing slightly hard. "I'm Lieutenant Torres, Reaper 11. I escorted your flight in." "I know, I saw you." "I'm sure this is weird," he said, glancing back at the fighters now parked near the military ramp. "But my co wants to talk to you. He's on the radio, patched through to the tower. He says it's important." Kestrel felt something cold slide down her spine. Why would your commanding officer want to talk to a passenger? Torres looked uncomfortable. "Because when we ran the manifest check during the emergency, one name flagged in our system. Yours," he paused. "You're Kestrel Voss." The name hung in the air between them like an undetonated bomb. "I was," Kestrel said carefully. "That was a long time ago." "Not that long." Torres shifted his weight. "Look, I don't know the whole story. I just know that when Commander Harding saw your name, he went quiet for about 10 seconds and then he said to find you, said it was urgent." He gestured toward a ground vehicle idling nearby. "It's just a conversation, 5 minutes. Then you can go." Kestrel looked at the terminal where safety and anonymity waited. Then she looked at the fighter jets on the ramp, their canopies still open, their weapons still hot from the flight. She thought about the last 3 years, the desk job, the slow suffocation of competence without purpose. 5 minutes, she said. The vehicle drove them across the airport to the military operations area, a corner of lax that civilians rarely saw. The building was nondescript, cinder block and government efficiency. But inside, the radio room was alive with controlled chaos. Screens showed aircraft tracks, weather systems, communication logs scrolling past in real time. A man in a flight suit stood with his back to them, speaking into a headset. When he turned, Kestrel felt the years collapse. Commander Matthew Harding was older now, grayer at the temples, but his eyes were the same, sharp, tactical, missing nothing. "Voss," he said, pulling off the headset, "Jesus Christ, it really is you." "Commander." Her voice was neutral, professional, giving nothing away. "You remember me." "I remember everyone from that squadron." Harding smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "I heard you left the service. Heard you were doing air traffic work somewhere inland." "You heard correctly. Waste of a good pilot. I made my choices." "Yeah," Harding crossed his arms. "About that, we need to talk about why you made them. Specifically, we need to talk about what happened over the Strait of Hormuz in October 2022. Kestrel's expression didn't change, but something inside her went very still. "That's classified." "Not anymore. As of 6 days ago, that incident was declassified under National Security Review. Turns out you were right. Every call you made that day, every regulation you broke, every order you ignored, it was the correct tactical decision. The board was wrong. The review panel was wrong. You saved 200 civilian lives and prevented an international incident that would have made the news for months." He paused. "And we ended your career for it." The room was very quiet. Lieutenant Torres, standing near the door, looked like he wanted to be anywhere else. "Why are you telling me this now?" Kestrel asked. "Because 3 hours ago, we lost contact with a Coast Guard HC-130 conducting SAR operations off the Baja coast. Last known position was 80 miles west of Ensenada. Weather is deteriorating. We've got 6 souls on board and maybe 4 hours of fuel remaining if they're still airborne." Harding leaned forward. "We need someone who can fly search patterns in degraded conditions, who can make calls when the book doesn't have answers, who can bring people home when the odds say they shouldn't come home at all. We need someone with your instincts." "I'm not current," Kestrel said. "I haven't flown operationally in 3 years." "You flew mentally about 30 minutes ago. Torres saw you through the fighter's camera feed. You were tracking angles, calculating fuel loads, reading the aircraft like you were still in the cockpit." Harding pulled a folder from the desk. "I can have you reinstated with full rank and flight status in 2 hours. I can have you in the air in 4. But I need to know now. Are you in or are you out?" Kestrel looked at the folder, at the maps on the wall showing the search area, at the faces of the 6 missing crew members pinned to the operations board. Young faces, somebody's children, somebody's reasons to come home. She thought about Seat 14C, about being a passenger in her own life, about the 3 years she'd spent filing reports and drinking bad coffee and pretending that being safe was the same as being alive. "I'm in," she said. Harding handed her the folder. "Welcome back, Major Voss. Let's go find our people." The Pacific Ocean at dusk was a study in gray scale. Pewter sky bleeding into charcoal water, the horizon line erased by mist and the failing light. Kestrel sat in the right seat of an HC-130J Combat King II, the long-range search and rescue variant of the Hercules, her hands on controls that felt both foreign and familiar. Like meeting an old lover after years apart. The muscle memory was still there, but the context had changed. The pilot in command was a woman named Major Lauren Cade, 15 years younger than Kestrel, but with eyes that had already seen enough to make her old in the ways that mattered. She'd raised an eyebrow when Kestrel climbed aboard at the Naval Air Station North Island, taking in the faded leather jacket and the 3-year gap in the flight logs. "You're the one who broke every rule in the book over Hormuz," Cade had said, not as a question. "That's the short version. And now they want you to help find a missing bird that's probably at the bottom of the ocean." Apparently, Cade had grinned then, fierce and approving. "Good. I like working with people who know when the rules are worth breaking. Strap in. It's going to be a long night." Now, 4 hours into the search, the cockpit was a cathedral of dim instrument light and whispered communication. The 2 flight engineers managed fuel calculations and systems monitoring with quiet efficiency. The navigator called out position updates. The radio operator cycled through emergency frequencies, listening for a signal that hadn't come. "Scan pattern Delta 3 complete," Cade said into the intercom. "No contact, proceeding to Delta 4. "Copy," the tactical coordinator called back from the cargo bay, where observers peered through windows into the darkening void below. Kestrel watched the moving map display. They'd been searching a grid that covered 60 square miles of open ocean, flying at 500 feet in deteriorating visibility. The missing HC-130 had been on a routine patrol when it reported mechanical issues and diverted toward the nearest airfield. Then nothing. No distress call. No emergency beacon. Just silence and the slow arithmetic of fuel endurance ticking toward zero. "What do you think happened?" Cade asked quietly. "Catastrophic electrical failure," Kestrel said. "Something that took out comms and navigation simultaneously. Maybe a lightning strike, maybe a generator failure cascade. They'd have tried to navigate by dead reckoning, but in these conditions—" She gestured at the mist pressing against the windscreen. "They could be 50 miles off their estimated position and never know it. Or they're swimming. Or that." The radio crackled. "Shepherd 7, this is Hammer 3-1, we're at Bingo Fuel, proceeding to recover." "Copy Hammer 3-1, thanks for the assist." Another search aircraft leaving the area. They were down to 2 HC-130s now, and their own fuel was becoming a factor. Kestrel glanced at the gauges. 90 minutes until they'd have to make the same choice, keep searching or save themselves. "What would you do?" Cade asked. She was watching Kestrel with the kind of intensity that made it clear this wasn't just conversation. "If you were the missing crew, where would you go?" Kestrel closed her eyes. She pulled up the mental map she'd been building since the briefing. Weather patterns, ocean currents, aircraft performance limits. She thought about what she'd do if everything failed at once. If the world went dark and the instruments lied and all she had was stick and rudder and the feel of the air. "I'd go west," she said finally. "Everyone's instinct is to turn toward land, toward safety. But with electrical failure, you can't trust your heading. The magnetic compass becomes your only reference, and it's slow, prone to error. I'd fly west deliberately, toward deeper water, away from shipping lanes, away from areas where going down would put civilians at risk." "That's insane, that's suicide." "That's what I'd do." Kestrel opened her eyes. "Because if I'm that crew, I know people will come looking. I know they'll search the logical areas first. And I know that buying time, even if it means going the wrong direction, might be the difference between being found and being forgotten." Cade stared at her for a long moment. Then she keyed the intercom. "Nav, replot our search pattern. Shift the center point 30 miles west of current datum." "Say again." The navigator sounded confused. "You heard me, west, deep water, and extend the search radius by 20%. Major, that takes us outside the probable search area." "I'm aware, do it anyway." Kestrel felt something warm bloom in her chest. Trust, the rarest gift one pilot could give another. They flew in silence for another 20 minutes, the ocean below them an infinite darkness, the mist thickening into something that was almost rain. The visibility dropped to a mile, then half a mile. The kind of weather where hope went to die. Shepherd 7, Shepherd 3 were at bingo fuel, returning to base. The other search aircraft, now they were alone. Copy Shepherd 3, safe flight. Cade looked at Kestrel. We've got 40 minutes, then we're done. You want to tell me again why we're flying away from the search area? Before Kestrel could answer, the radio operator's voice cut through the intercom, sharp with sudden intensity. Wait, I've got something. Faint signal, bearing 270, ELT transmission. Emergency locator transmitter, the automated beacon that activated on impact. Range, Cade demanded. Can't get a solid reading. Signal strength is weak. Could be 20 miles, could be 50, but it's there. Kestrel leaned forward, checking the bearing. Due west, exactly where she'd said to look. Take us there, Cade said. Full power, let's bring them home. The HC-130 banked hard, the engines roaring up to maximum continuous thrust. The aircraft shuddered slightly as they accelerated through their own wake turbulence, and then they were tracking straight toward the signal, every eye straining into the darkness. Come on, Cade whispered. Be alive, please be alive. The signal grew stronger. The radio operator gave constant updates, refining the bearing, narrowing the search. 2 minutes, 5 minutes, 10. And then the navigator called out, his voice controlled but electric with adrenaline. Visual contact, 2 o'clock low. I've got strobes in the water. Kestrel saw them, tiny pinpoints of white light flashing in sequence against the black ocean, the strobe pattern of survival rafts. Confirmed, she said, her voice steady despite the hammer of her heartbeat. We have survivors. The cargo bay exploded into coordinated chaos. The loadmaster began preparing the rescue gear. The tactical coordinator established radio contact with the rafts, 6 voices, weak but alive, reporting minor injuries and hypothermia but no casualties. The missing aircrew had ditched successfully, deployed their life rafts, and survived 4 hours in open ocean waiting for exactly this moment. Cade circled the position, marking it with flares that burned bright orange against the water. Shepherd Operations, Shepherd 7, we have located the missing crew, 6 souls, all alive. Request immediate SAR asset deployment. Shepherd 7, copy all. Coast Guard Jayhawk is inbound your position, ETA 30 mics. Maintain orbit and provide guidance. 30 minutes. Not long in the grand scheme. An eternity if you were sitting in a raft watching the darkness and wondering if the lights above you were real or just another hallucination brought on by cold and fear. Kestrel watched the strobes, watched Cade fly the pattern with textbook precision, watched the fuel gauges tick down toward the point where they'd have to leave, trusting that the rescue helicopter would arrive before the ocean claimed what it had temporarily relinquished. You were right, Cade said quietly. They went west, away from the search area. How did you know? Because it's what I did once, Kestrel said. Over Hormuz, when everything went wrong and the book didn't have answers. I flew away from safety because safety was the trap. She paused. They court-martialed me for it. But you saved everyone. I saved everyone. That's what made it unforgivable. I proved that breaking the rules could work, and institutions can't survive that kind of precedent. Cade was quiet for a moment. Then, I'm glad they brought you back. So am I. The rescue helicopter arrived 28 minutes later, its rotor wash creating a circle of churned water around the rafts. The hoist operator descended with professional grace, securing survivors one by one, lifting them from the ocean into the warm belly of the Jayhawk, where medics waited with blankets and IVs, and the kind of gentle competence that made trauma survivable. When the last survivor was aboard, when the rafts were deflated and recovered, when the ocean was empty again except for the dying flares, Kestrel felt something release inside her chest. A knot she'd been carrying for 3 years, finally untangling. Shepherd 7, all souls recovered. You are cleared to return to base. And Shepherd 7, the Jayhawk pilot's voice was warm. That was outstanding work. Someone's coming home tonight because of you. Copy that, Jayhawk. Safe flight. Cade turned the HC-130 toward home. The mist was lifting now, the weather breaking up as they climbed through 8,000 feet. Stars appeared through gaps in the clouds, hard and bright and indifferent to human drama. What happens now? Cade asked. For you, I mean. Kestrel looked out at the night, at the ocean receding below, at the instruments glowing softly in the cockpit, the numbers and needles that translated chaos into meaning, that gave order to a world that had none. I fly, she said simply. That's what I do, that's who I am. 3 months later, Kestrel was back in the rotation. Full flight status. Major Voss, call sign Kestrel, assigned to a search and rescue squadron operating out of California. The days became a rhythm of training flights and readiness drills, punctuated by actual missions that reminded her why she'd learned to fly in the first place. She didn't talk about Hormuz. Didn't need to. The story had spread through the aviation community the way all good stories did, whispered in ready rooms, discussed in debrief sessions, becoming legend through repetition. The pilot who broke the rules and saved everyone. The pilot who was punished for being right. The pilot who came back. Some of the younger aviators looked at her with something like awe, others with skepticism. A few with the kind of competitive hostility that came from insecurity and too much ego in too small a space. Kestrel didn't care. She flew her missions. She brought people home. She went asleep at night without the weight of regret crushing her chest. It was enough. Until the day Commander Harding called her into his office and closed the door with the kind of deliberate care that meant the conversation wasn't going to be routine. We have a problem, he said without preamble. More specifically, the Navy has a problem, and they think you might be the solution. Kestrel sat down. I'm listening. 6 weeks ago, a prototype aircraft went down during a test flight over the Arizona desert. Highly classified program. The pilot ejected safely, but the aircraft crashed in terrain that's almost impossible to access. Steep canyons. No roads. The recovery team has been trying to reach the wreckage, but they're encountering difficulties. What kind of difficulties? The kind that come from discovering the site isn't as uninhabited as they thought. Harding slid a folder across the desk. Inside were satellite photos showing the crash site, the scattered debris and something else, structures. Small, carefully concealed, but definitely man-made. Who's there? Kestrel asked. We don't know yet. What we do know is that someone reached that wreckage before our recovery team could get there. Someone who knows enough about aviation to recognize what they're looking at. Someone who's been very carefully removing components and disappearing back into the canyons. Kestrel studied the photos. The crash pattern suggested a controlled descent rather than a catastrophic failure. The pilot had been trying to save the aircraft until the very last moment. The debris field was relatively compact, which meant most of the critical technology was probably still intact. You need someone to go in on foot, she said. Someone who can navigate the terrain and identify what's been taken. We need someone who understands prototype aircraft systems, someone who can think tactically, someone who won't panic if things get complicated. Harding met her eyes. We need someone who's already proven they can operate outside normal parameters and bring everyone home alive. This isn't a rescue mission. No, it's a recovery mission, but the principles are the same. Go into an impossible situation. Find what needs to be found. Come back. Kestrel closed the folder. Outside the window, she could see the flight line, the neat rows of aircraft waiting for their next mission. She thought about the prototype lying scattered across some remote canyon, about the unknown people who were stealing its secrets, about the pilot who'd ejected safely but whose aircraft was now a vulnerability that threatened national security. When do I leave? She asked. Tomorrow, 0600. There's a team assembling, couple of Air Force combat rescue officers, a forensic tech and a guide who knows the territory. You're the aviation expert. You identify what's critical. You decide what gets prioritized for recovery. You make the calls when the situation doesn't fit the plan. Sounds familiar? Harding almost smiled. Doesn't it though? Voss, I'm not going to lie to you. This could get messy. If someone's already at that wreck site, someone who knows what they're looking for, there's a chance this becomes more than just a recovery operation. You're saying it could get hostile. I'm saying carry your sidearm and remember that sometimes the most important thing you can do is come home. The wreckage is secondary to personnel safety. Your safety. Kestrel stood. Understood, sir. She turned to leave, but Harding's voice stopped her. Voss, that thing you did over Hormuz, that decision that cost you 3 years, would you make it again? She didn't hesitate. Yes, sir. Good, because I have a feeling this mission is going to require exactly that kind of judgment. The helicopter insertion happened at dawn, the desert floor still cool and shadowed, the rocks painted in shades of rust and amber by the rising sun. Kestrel dropped from the hovering Black Hawk with 3 others, hitting the sandy ground in a crouch, weapon slung across her chest, pack heavy with water and equipment. The rotors kicked up a storm of grit and noise, and then the aircraft was gone, banking away to the east, leaving them in sudden silence. The team leader was a weathered Air Force captain named Marcus Webb, with the kind of face that suggested he'd spent most of his career in places that didn't officially exist. He checked his GPS, oriented on the terrain, and gestured toward a narrow canyon cutting through the cliffs ahead. Crash site is 3 miles that direction. Should take us about 2 hours in this terrain. Stay sharp. Watch for heat casualties. And if you see anyone who shouldn't be here, we observe and report. We don't engage unless there's no choice. They moved in tactical spacing, rifles ready but not raised, every sense alert for signs of human presence. The canyon was beautiful in the way that dangerous places often were, towering rock walls striped with mineral deposits, ancient petroglyphs carved by people who'd walked this land centuries before aircraft existed. The silence was profound, broken only by their footsteps and the occasional cry of a hawk circling overhead. Kestrel scanned constantly, not just for people but for the subtle signs that distinguished wild terrain from inhabited terrain, disturbed earth, broken vegetation, the slight trail of compacted sand that marked regular passage. She saw it after 40 minutes, a footprint partial but clear in a patch of fine dust between 2 rocks, fresh, maybe a day old. Hold, she whispered. Webb saw it too. His expression didn't change, but his hand moved to his rifle. Someone's been here recently, single track, heading deeper into the canyon. Toward the crash site, Kestrel said. Yeah, Webb keyed his radio. Overwatch, this is ground team. Be advised we have evidence of recent human activity on approach to objective. Continuing mission, weapons tight. They moved slower now. Every turn in the canyon could hide an ambush. Every sound could be a warning. The temperature climbed as the sun rose higher, baking the rocks, turning the canyon into a convection oven. And then they rounded a bend and saw it. The wreckage was spread across a small flat area where the canyon widened, twisted metal and shattered composite materials, the angular edges that marked stealth technology, the burned patches where fuel had ignited on impact. The tail section was relatively intact, still bearing the low-visibility markings of a test aircraft. The forward fuselage was crumpled, the cockpit crushed despite the pilot's ejection. But what struck Kestrel immediately was how organized the destruction looked. Not the random chaos of a crash, but the methodical disassembly of a site that had already been scavenged. They've been here, she said quietly. Multiple times. Look at the patterns. Components had been removed with care, access panels,